So the next amazing speak would be from Eric. So I would like to bring him on the screen, and then I would like to discuss or introduce something about Eric, and then I would like to give stage to Eric. So yeah, please welcome Eric. He's from United States, and of course he's working for Couchbase, and he's an international speaker, blogger, and he advocate for JavaScript, and he has spoken at React Live, NL, React Loop, and a lot of other stuff. So yeah, I would like to give this stage to Eric and let him introduce himself in his own words. So welcome, Eric, to this speak.
Hey, how you doing? Very nice to be here. Yeah, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, living in Fremont. Developer for about 20 years, a lot of that time as full stack. But I also have a lot of experience with frameworks like Angular and React. I've been living here in the Bay Area for over 5 years, worked for SolarCity, Tesla, Progress Software, and now Couchbase.
That's great, Eric. Nice to hear from you. And yeah, so take this stage away, and yeah, it's totally yours, the 40 minutes of the time. So see you after 40 minutes. And yeah, don't worry, we'll keep you informing about like if you're running out of the time, and also don't worry about that. So take it away.
That's perfect. Yeah, so today I'm going to be talking about context API to RecoilJS. Basically the how, the why to use Recoil, when you can use it in place of context API, but better, what is that threshold that you eventually get to in your application where you need something like like Recoil, because a lot of the time the regular state and context API that comes with React is good enough and it gets you very, very far. But there are some situations which I'll try to highlight. I'll have a more advanced example that we'll show, but for the demo and for a lot of the code on the slides, these are a lot, I guess, a more contrived example of the same situation. And of course, the demo that I'm going to show you at first, it doesn't look like you really need RecoilJS for it. And I would probably argue that you're right about that. But it is the simplest kind of use of these things called atom families and selector families inside Recoil, which I think if you're not using these things in Recoil, you really probably don't need RecoilJS. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and share my screen so I can show you guys my slides. Let's see if this works here. And can you guys see my screen? My slides?
Well,
there we go. Perfect.
Yep.
All right, great. And look, and I even get to show up on the other side with my face. So yeah, RecoilJS, basically what is it? And we're gonna get into that. So our agenda is basically first, we're gonna talk about a case summary, kind of why, what is the issues with context API, a reason that you might reach for Recoil. I'm going to go over kind of making the switch over to Recoil. And then when I go over this example.
Sorry to interrupt you, Eric.
Yeah.
I think your slide lost. We are not able to see your slide.
Let me try it again here. All right, so I'm sharing the slides now. Great. So here's the agenda again. Again, first we're going to go over the case summary. Then we'll go over making the switch over to Recoil. And in this example, we're not going to really be using Recoil for what it's used for. Instead, we're going to be controlling some global state in the application, a theme, and like a side navigation that opens and closes. But walking you through that example and showing you how to switch out from context to API, I think is very useful for just getting to know Recoil in the first place. And then we will move on from there with better examples of Recoil and then why you really would use it. Also, towards the end of the talk, I will be showing this slide again. Obviously, you can pause in a virtual stream. So, but I will show this slide again at the end. This is where all my resources are for this talk. And there are some really good resources which I'll talk to you again at the end of the talk. So the case for basically using Recoil instead of Context API. So as all major programming issues, our example starts with a basic list. So this is the most simple example that I can provide that makes case for Recoil. It's easy enough for you to replicate, but not so complex that it's hard to follow. So we have this contrived travel application with hotels that you can choose from. And you can basically add hotels from the left-hand side over to a favorites list on the right-hand side. Pretty easy, right? So the list on the left are hotels that we fetch, obviously from a Couchbase database, but actually we're fetching them from a GraphQL API. And this can easily be handled by internal state, something like Apollo, query, React query, something like that. And on the right-hand side, the favorites, those get added at will. And we want to be able to basically click on, to book it. So one of these gray check marks, we'd be able to click that one since there's vacancies, and it would basically change the state of that one favorite, right? Like I said, it's a contrived example, but follow with me here. Now, if it's a red, kind of like a stop sign looking thing here, that means there is no vacancies and you can't click on it. All right. So when we book this, we're actually going to change the state of that single favorite. So each one of these hotels in my favorites list is its own component. And in Recoil, each of those can have their own state, kind of like their own context provider, generated, like I said, on the fly at will. If I were managing the favorites list with Context API, when I click the check mark to book the hotel, instead of just updating the one instance, like for instance, the Malibu Beach Inn, so that favorite component, it would actually re-render the entire list. And if you had React DevTools on, it would look like something like this, right? Not only is it going to update the other favorites when it's unnecessary to update them, but it's also going to potentially re-render the entire favorites list, which is the component that all of these individual favorites are inside of, right? And we don't want that. Instead, we would like to see just the Malibu Beach Inn component updated. And so, we don't want to have to create a context provider. We want to be able to easily sprinkle Recoil throughout our application. In the case where this is my team and I are working on an application like this, maybe it's a real large application and this is just one screen. But it would be nice if we could just sprinkle Recoil into maybe the favorites list component and this overall screen here, but not put it anywhere else in my app. And that also, with the way Recoil works, you can kind of sprinkle it in and use it, and you can do code splitting, because basically the atoms, which are the single pieces of state that are tied to each of these individual favorite components, it's all done right there inside of that favorite component page, so to speak. And because of that, until the favorites list, until the component that houses the favorites list loads, you don't actually end up loading Recoil. So again, code splitting and the ability to kind of integrate Recoil into your project in little tiny pieces until you're ready to go full into Recoil. And once you do go full into Recoil, there's a lot of other benefits that you get, ergonomic benefits, etc., that you gain from Recoil. But again, you have to have a reason to use Recoil. You don't just use it because it's cooler than Context API. So the first thing I want to do here real quick is just walk you through this demo. So this is actually the working version with Recoil. And I just want to show you this. I have the components here, and I've got highlight updates when components render. So again, we have a list of hotels over here. And if I click one of them, right, these all three have vacancies. So I would be able to book those if I wanted to, but this one doesn't. So I can't book it. Notice when I'm adding them to, it's only kind of updating that one component inside this favorites list. And if I go to book it, I'm actually changing state in that component. And you'll see that the highlight is just around that individual component. And this is exactly what you want. Now, we'll come back to this demo in a little bit. But for right now, I'm actually going to go back to our presentation and continue on. And we'll see more of that demo in a little bit. All right. So making the switch from Context API to Recoil. Again, this is the example where we don't really need to use recoil, but it's a good kind of if I can walk you through switching over from context API to recoil, you might understand how to pull it into your project a little bit easier. So in that application that I showed you, there are things like you've got, if we make it real small here, we've got this side navigation that opens up, and we've got a light and a dark theme here, okay? So we'll see that, how that's kind of implemented in Context API. So what we're looking at here is the, what are we looking at here? So this is kind of a very basic example of using a theme. So this is easily solved by Context API, but we've chosen to go with recoil just to show you the basics of it. So we can simply import an atom using use recoil state instead of use state. So as you see here, I'm sorry, this is the screen I was supposed to be on here. As you see here, we have use state set up on two different components. And we are, in effect, keeping track of state in two different components. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this very simple example first is to show you how easy it is to go from using just basic use state, not even Context API, just regular React state in a functional component, and then going to using use recoil state. So if we kind of toggle back and forth between these two, you'll see that the use state gets changed to use recoil state. And even the tuple on the left-hand side, tuple, whatever you want to call it, has dark mode and set dark mode. And now with recoil here, you're not keeping track of state in two different places. You are actually keeping track of state in just one recoil atom, and any changes made to that atom will re-render both of these components. Like I said, contrived example, but it kind of shows you very easily how you can use recoil. And in the second one here, we actually don't even need to use recoil state. So we can have a little bit additional optimization here by getting rid of that and using use recoil value instead. You can see on the bottom here, I've changed this to use recoil value. Now I've had to do another import up there from recoil, but so now one of my components uses use recoil state because it needs to both read that state and be able to set it, whereas the button only needs to be able to read that use recoil value. And if we were using Context API here, you could think of the button having like a const context equals use context, some type of context. So Context API was a much welcome feature in React, and it's an improvement over the prior experimental Context API that maybe some of you remember. And as of today, it's widely used for state outside of the normal component model, especially for state that is app-wide and global. There are limitations to Context API, though, and Recoil was created specifically for this purpose and provides an API familiar to anyone that uses like the normal React and normal use state, like I just showed you. When you're using Recoil, it feels a lot like React, and that makes sense. It's created by a team at Facebook on the Facebook open source team, and it is currently an experimental library, but they are looking to release it sometime in the future, and it will have, it'll be compatible with like concurrent mode and all that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, and so Recoil instead of Context API, usually you want to use Recoil when you want to have flexible shared state. So shared state between two components, that's boilerplate free, no reducers, simple get and set with the ability to code split. You want derived data and queries. So derived data simply safely from state and or other derived data accessible in the same way that a normal state is accessed. And you can do it synchronously or asynchronously. And what I mean by derived data, so you could either be getting data through an async query or just using other atoms and kind of combining their values together, or combining the value of an atom, like I said, which is a piece of state, along with some type of calculation, like whatever. And then finally, kind of app-wide state observation. You want to read and or observe any part of Recoil state and potentially even persist that to an API or database, and the ability to rehydrate that state back into Recoil. So these are some of the reasons why you might want to use Recoil, and where Context API might let you down. As well, this unique type of state can be derived like I said, with values from other slices of state. These slices of state in Recoil, they're called atoms. And when you want to derive state from another atom and kind of use calculations to create a new type of state, that's called a selector. Okay. Yeah. So basically, Recoil solves the problems in an application where you need a large number of rendered components, each needing to be frequently updated, and it needs to update and render in isolation, right? Just that one component. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a more realistic version. This is the theme in the side nav that I was talking about. It's right now it's currently using Context API. So let's make the change and switch it over to Recoil. So here you can see the context provider component. It tracks a few pieces of state globally. That's the nav open state and the theme state. For the sake of keeping the context variables separate from our Recoil state, when I recreate it in Recoil, I'm just going to add Recoil to the end of it. So theme will become theme Recoil, nav open will become nav open Recoil. And that also helps when you're actually making the change realistically in your application. You don't want them to be named the same thing. It'll make it very hard to do finds and replaces and stuff like that. But again, in context, you have to have this this provider component, and you have to use state inside of there. And I've even got like some use effects and some other things going on in here, some initialization for the preferred theme. You know, I want to look at the user's machine and figure out if they have dark or light mode set, and then base maybe my default off of that, right? So there's some initialization, some effects, and then also the management of my state inside of this provider component. Now, in order to kind of replicate this with Recoil, right, I go from this, as far as the state is concerned, to this. So we import atom and selector. As you can see here, we have nav open Recoil and theme Recoil. They have a key. Now the key needs to be a unique value, and it needs to be serializable. So like a string is great. And then down here at the bottom, we have something called theme text Recoil. So this is a very contrived example of using a selector. It's the most easiest way you can use a selector. Basically, what I'm doing with the selector is I'm using the get, and I'm getting theme Recoil. So that's going to be either light or dark. It's going to be a string called light or dark. And I'm attaching some text onto it, right? So the product of this selector is the theme is light, the theme is dark, right? Very contrived example, but it shows the most basic use of a selector. Now think if you wanted to use multiple atoms and maybe another selector or something to be able to create this selector, right? So it's very powerful as well. Although this is a simple example, you can get very intricate with it. The next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go into our app.js, right? And we're going to have to take that app provider that wraps around our entire application. In my application, I create basically the entire app in a component called frame. That's where you know, all of my layout and everything is. And I need to change it to Recoil root. Now, Recoil root looks a lot like a provider, and it acts kind of the same way, uses Context API underneath the hood. But I would think of it more as like a manager of many providers, each of which can be assigned to an individual component, right? Remember how I said we had some initialization going on inside of that provider component? Well, what I've done is I've taken just those bits out. So just the initializer and just the effect, and I put it into a hook called use theme initializer. Now, all the code for this is going to be available in my resources at the end. So just letting you know. If I'm going a little bit too fast, you will be able to see it all again. Now, let's see here. I think I've got an extra screen here. All right. So here is the actual theme initializer. And if we go back here real quick, this is the frame component that I was telling you about that my Recoil root wraps around. And here I've just kind of imported that use effect, and I'm calling that before I do anything else. And this will help to set some of that some of that initial state in my atoms. And as you can see here, this is the actual theme initializer. This is that hook that I was telling you about, where I've imported theme Recoil from my atoms, And I am basically doing some basic setup here. And then you've got the use effects that we saw that were originally in the app provider component. Finally, we have a couple of other components that used that original app context. So here we have a side nav, and you're probably familiar with this if you've used Context API before. And so we want to go from this to using Recoil. Here's the basic change that you need to make, right? So at first, you're going to import Recoil and your atoms. And then instead of use context, you're going to use Recoil value. And then down here at the bottom, instead of context.navopen to actually change the value of that navopen state, we're just going to call navopen. I'm sorry, we're going to read navopen. Sorry about that. So in this component, we're just reading. Next, we have a menu, which actually does do something to the state. So here we are using the context, this app context that we originally were using, and we're saying context.toggleSideNav. We want to change the value of that nav open. Is the nav open or closed, right? So in order to use Recoil, we're just going to import Recoil state. And Recoil state gives you the ability to, since it has a tuple here, you have nav open and toggle side nav. So you can both read and set it. Whereas before over here, we were using use recoil value because we just want to be able to read recoil state, right? So recoil value versus use recoil state. And then at the very bottom here, we're just calling toggle side nav rather than context toggle side nav, but it's pretty much the same thing. All right. And then with that, you're basically done converting a very basic amount of global React state that was using Context API to using Recoil. Great. You've used Recoil for a reason that's not really needed. But the cool thing is that if you find a good reason to use Recoil, like we're going to show you, then why not use Recoil for things like that in the rest of your application? So that's a good idea too. So first, we will just go over Recoil and some of the basics again. So Recoil can help us handle like what Dave McCabe, the creator, calls leafy state. Sometimes we want to update a particular leaf and not cause the entire tree to re-render. React does a few things well, like massive changes to the entire screen or a very small update to one component that has its own local state. So it works great in those cases. But in the case where you have a large tree, you have many leaves and many components, so to speak, we need to be able to update a particular component without triggering changes and re-renders statewide. Okay, so this is the Recoil website. Recoil was released at React Europe last year. I was actually the guy doing the Q&A at that conference, so it was really cool to be able to learn about Recoil in that way. And there's not a lot of API to learn. As I said, it's very close and matches the React API. You can literally sprinkle and co-locate Recoil bits into your app and code split those components. It's using React local state under the hood. Think of it as multi-context. Context has one value that consumers can consume per provider. Recoil is a provider that can create any number of values that can have their own consumer. Everything else, like atom family selectors and selector family. So for this reason, the API is designed to eventually be compatible with concurrent mode, but also feel like you're actually using React and all of the different APIs inside of Recoil. That's what I'm trying to say. They all feel like React. I kind of tripped myself up there, but that's the whole point. It feels just like React, and of course it would. So Recoil, how can it actually help us? So if we go back to our issue where we had a list of items stored in Context API. So with Recoil, we can put those items in an atom family. This creates a separate atom that is linked to each item, each of the items in the favorites list. Remember, Recoil is like a provider that can create any number of values that can have their own consumer. This means that when we change a single item in that list, only the subscriber to that specific atom will be updated. So this is like being able to create a separate React context for every single favorite. All right. This way, atoms and selectors can build off of each other, and they can be deployed in groups called families. And that's like the real power of Recoil when you get into these atom families, right? If you're just using atom by itself, you're not really using Recoil to its full potential. Once you start using atom family and selector family, those two APIs, I feel that you're now getting into the crux of what Recoil is there for. So here we see an atom family. Notice that when we call it, we don't just use the atom family name. We actually pass in an ID, like a function. This means each favorite in our favorite list has its own atom with the state isolated in that atom. All right, so this is kind of, if we're working backwards from the favorite component up to the favorite list and then to the whole hotel's list page, we'll start here on the favorites component, right? And as you can see, we've got an atom created up here. An atom family created up here, and its key is favorite. And its default for, so each atom default is just going to be a blank name and booked equals false. And then when this favorite gets created, we use recoil state. We pass the ID for this particular hotel in to the favorite by ID function, which is actually atom family. And now we get our first atom inside of that atom family. Also, there's another thing here, vacancy, which has this use recoil value. Another thing I wanted to show you really quickly is how this is in the same file. It's just above the code that we just saw. Just like an atom family is a family of atoms, a selector family is a family of selectors. And even though I'm not really using any atom values in the selector family, I wanted to show a really simple way of how to do like an async call in this selector family. Now, a lot of the times there would be a lot of other things going on here. You can do not only a get, but you can do a set within a selector family. So again, this is a very, very simple way of using selector family. I'm not even sure if this is the best practice, but it does show you that the async capabilities are possible. And what happens is when you add this favorite, this hotel as a favorite, what we're going to do is we're going to call this GraphQL query up here, and we're going to get the new value or whatever the current value of that vacancy is to make sure that right when we add that atom or that particular favorite, that we are getting the most up-to-date version of the vacancy. Like, is it vacant or not? Can we book it? So now we need to create the favorites list, which I have highlighted here. So if the favorite is each one of these hotels in your favorite list, then the favorite list is kind of the component that houses all of them. So let's take a look really quickly at what the favorites list component looks like. All right, so here we have favorite list IDs. And basically, we're just creating an atom where the value is an array of IDs. So think of, you have kind of an atom family over here, and you have this list of IDs, and that allows you to kind of assign an atom for each particular favorite. And here you can see we have the favorite IDs equals use recoil value. So we're going and getting the value of all those IDs. So basically, const favorite IDs is just an array of IDs of hotels that we've added to our hotel list. And then the favorites list generates a favorite for each one of those. Pretty simple. Finally, we have like the whole page, right? The hotel list page. And on this page, we can kind of, we call this thing, all right, let's break it down here. We have favorite IDs at the top, right? Which is, we've already seen this. We know what that holds. Next, we have this add ID to list and create favorite. Okay, now I named it kind of long on purpose because I wanted you to know exactly what this thing does. And you can dig around this code a little bit later. I can't go into it all in depth right now, but basically what we're doing is down at the bottom in the list items, that is the list of all the different hotels on the left-hand side of the screen. And there's an icon in there that you can click. And when you click on it, it adds the favorite to the favorites list, okay? And it calls insert favorite, all right? So basically that insert favorite is basically use recoil callback. So use recoil callback is similar to use callback in React. And it provides an API to work with, update recoil state. It's async capable. It has other, instead of just set, you can do set, snapshot, go to snapshot, reset. So there's some other API to it. And we pass add ID to list and create favorite callback function we pass it in and return our function. So our signature for insert favorite is the same as our returned function add ID to list and create favorite. All right. So if you wanted, you could literally just take, instead of creating add ID to list and create favorite, you could just throw that in as the callback to use recoil callback. And that would be just fine. But I've kind of broken them up as separate pieces of code here. So what this in effect does is whenever you click the add favorite button here, it adds it to the favorites list. It generates a new favorite component. That new favorite component has a piece of Atom state assigned to it. And if that state ever changes, and we can change it very easily with recoil, it will update just that one individual component. Okay. Right. So far, if you store state of many items in one piece of context, you can't isolate that state. So only changing one item renders only that item, right? You can accomplish this with React by using Atom Family. We talked about that. Although you can use recoil as a replacement for context API, the real power comes with Atom Family and selector families. So pay attention to those if you start to learn recoil. And Atom Family allows you to store each element's state in its own atom. All right. So a little bit more demo and be able to really show you guys how some of this is working. So let's start with the hotel list application. So one thing we want to do, like I said before, whenever we add one of these, we are not only creating a favorite inside of that favorites list and an atom inside of the Atom Family, but we're also checking the vacancy. And that can be a useful thing to do in your application. So see right here, it says vacancy is yes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll over here real quick, and I'm just going to change that. Does that not work? Here, let's grab one that does work here. 17309 should work. Oh, I think I had a space in there. That's why it wasn't working. All right. So currently this one, its vacancy is set to true. We're going to change it to false. Save it. And so now this one here, it has a vacancy says yes here, but when I add it, it should say no when I add it. So there we go. It's not. Now I'm not updating it over here. That's more than this is going to cover, but you can see here that I've been able to not only create a new atom, but I've been able to call like an async operation and get some type of value and derive state based off of that value. Now, if I add the rest of them here, you'll see, just like before, only the individual atoms are lighting up and re-rendering. So next, what we want to do real quick is we want to go to a more involved example, right? So in this next one, I want to tell you guys that a lot of the stuff that I've learned about recoil, I've learned from a guy named Jacques Blom, and he has a lot of different tutorials, but he has this course here, Learn Recoil for free. I just wanted to show that real quick because it's really the best learning you can do for recoil. I haven't found anything else out there that's better. So here we have a design app. And if any of you have seen Dave McCabe's demo from React Europe, this is exactly kind of what he was showing. Now, as I add all of these items to the page and we have re-rendering, highlight re-rendering, you'll see that as I move these around, you're getting, each of these is getting lit up, right? So it's never, it's always re-rendering. Every kind of millisecond, those other components are re-rendering, and that's not good, especially when you start to add a lot of them to the page. Things could potentially get very slow. So think of a design application where you've got a toolbar and all that kind of stuff, right? So this isn't good. Now, the reason why they're re-rendering is because this is using Context API. Basically, we've taken this application here as far as we can with Context API. So now let's look at the same application, which is using Recoil instead of Context API. And we have all of the stuff for this is all inside of my the README here. If you go to that link that I share, all of these repos and everything are inside here. So let's add some more of these to the page. Let's kind of pull them around and watch as I move it. So as I'm moving it, the only thing that's updating is this component over here on the right where the position and stuff is. And that's supposed to be updating. But as I rescale it and as I move it around, we are not seeing these other items re-render. And that's a huge performance boost. And this is the reason why you use Recoil, right? And this is a more advanced example. You can walk through this course here. It'll show you how to build this entire thing. However, my example here, which you also have access to, is like the simplest way of kind of doing the same thing. I've got a list. It's got items. My favorites could eventually be 1,000 of them here. And when I change something, I don't want them all to re-render. All right. So with that being said, I don't think I have a lot more slides. Let me go ahead and finish out the end of this here. Get this presenter view out of here. So again,
5 minutes. 5 minutes are left,
great.
Eric. So you're good to go.
Absolutely. So, like I said before, Learn Recoil is a place where I've learned a lot of the things that I have about Recoil. Jacques Blom, a good friend of mine, has put this entire course together, made it free out there. I really suggest you taking a look at it, especially Recoil is experimental. As a developer in the React space, you really should be kind of not focusing on, but taking note of what's on the horizon, what's coming out next in React, and what tools out there can help you do certain things. And you've got to understand what are the things that that tool helps you to do, and not use it just for no reason. And then, if you don't know Jacques, you might know him from his hardcore YouTube bangers like Intro to Recoil, Blitz in 10 minutes, Recoil in 2 minutes, New in Recoil 02.0. Again, I said it's experimental. It's not released for production yet. Data fetching with Recoil and suspense, and building a high-performance React app, which is also a Recoil video. So do check out all of his information. I have some talks that I have actually put up in our resources page here. And you can get a hold of me. My name is Eric Bouchard, but I'm at HTTP Junkie on Twitter. And on LinkedIn, I'm in /Eric-B. And when you go to this tiny URL right here, you will get to this repo, which is the hotel list repo. Again, the most simplest version of why you need to use Recoil. It's a very easy, simple configuration. I'm both controlling global state and also the hotel favorites list in there. So there's a lot of different examples in there. It's all function components and hooks and everything. And then through here, you will see some of the different demos that we've gone over. The original React Europe talk that we had here, and all of Jacques Blom's YouTube tutorials, along with his learning resources, and then some other resources. So a friend of mine over at Progress on the Kendo React team did a React Wednesdays where he gets Dave McCabe and sits down and just asks him a lot of really good questions. I talked at React ATL about 2 weeks ago, doing a similar talk to what I'm doing now, but where we walked through the entire thing, building that entire app. And so I'm very sorry if I was a little bit fast or if I tripped up. But this is where you could potentially go and watch me build the entire thing right in front of you. And then I also saw a really good one here. This is, who is this? Lehigh, I always forget his name. Yeah, Lee Halliday. Sorry. Lee Halliday does draggable divs with Recoil state management. And with that, that is basically the end of my talk. And I'll go ahead and pass it back over to you guys. And yeah, thank you very much for having me. And this has been great.
Thanks, Eric, for such a wonderful speak. And I won't say that was too fast. That was not too slow. Everything was precise, well explained, and
they can always pause it, right?
Yes, correct. So one of the takeaway for me from your speak was to avoid re-rendering. So that was one of the best thing which I would say as an engineer, because as an engineer, we always compromise or get stuck into the DOM re-rendering. So what you explain that can help the viewers who are watching your video to understand how they can avoid re-rendering. Because as an engineer, I feel the most expensive thing which you can put onto a browser is a re-rendering, a DOM re-rendering. So that was a very good point.
Yep.
And yeah, Eric, that was totally a nice speak from you. So Yeah, and hope you are good at your health. And sorry, I didn't ask you at the beginning, but looking the situation, I need to ask about the health of my speaker.
Oh yeah, I'm doing well. Haven't had COVID, I don't think. I think at the very beginning of all this, I was sick, but I don't know if it was COVID or not. The last year, everything's been fine, and my family is doing well here. And yeah, couldn't be better. I hope that we can all get out and kind of meet each other again at the conferences soon. That will be great. It'll be nice to travel again soon, but it is what it is.
Yes, the same thing. Even I'm wondering if we can get this a face-to-face kind of festival, which we are doing virtual. So yeah, hope for the best for upcoming year. So yeah,
Yep.
thank you, Eric, for your time and really appreciate your presence here onto this speak. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And check out my stuff and check out Couchbase. All great stuff. I hope you guys like it. Thanks a lot.
All right then, bye bye.